The sun blazed over the desolate desert training range, where the air shimmered with heat and the scent of gunpowder clung to the breeze. General Marcus Hale, a grizzled veteran with 35 years of service, stood before a line of elite marksmen, his voice cutting through the stillness like a knife. The target, small as a coin, sat 4,000 meters away, a near impossible distance for even the most seasoned snipers. "Any snipers here?" he barked, his gaze sweeping the ranks. The soldiers, clad in camouflage and battle gear, stiffened. 13 of the unit's top shooters had already failed to hit the mark. Now all eyes turned to the woman standing at the edge of the group, a supply clerk named Ilara Voss, whose presence seemed out of place among the elite. The stage was set for a moment that would redefine courage, skill, and the unyielding spirit of the underdog. The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of sand under a cloudless sky, with mountains looming like ancient sentinels in the distance. General Hale's question hung in the air, heavy with implication. "Any snipers here?" he repeated, his tone laced with impatience. 13 marksmen had already stepped forward, each a specialist trained in long-range precision. Yet none had pierced the target at 4,000 meters. The range was a myth among the troops, a legend whispered about during late-night patrols, a test so extreme it bordered on the absurd. The rifles lined up on the table, state-of-the-art 50-caliber sniper systems gleamed under the sun, their scopes calibrated to within microns of accuracy. Yet as each shooter took their turn, the bullets veered off course, the wind carrying them like whispers into the void. The first miss came from Captain Reyes, a veteran who'd served in 3 conflicts. His shot, though technically flawless, fell short by a hair. Then came Sergeant Chen, whose breath control was legendary, but even his steady hands couldn't conquer the atmospheric distortion at such a distance. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th attempts followed the same pattern, each sniper's confidence eroding as the target remained untouched. By the 10th miss, murmurs of disbelief rippled through the ranks. "It's not the rifles," muttered one soldier. "It's the range. No one can hit that." General Hale's jaw tightened. He'd ordered this demonstration to test his unit's resolve, to remind them that precision was as much a mental battle as a physical one. But as the 13th sniper, Lieutenant Kale, a man whose name was synonymous with accuracy, lowered his rifle with a defeated sigh, the general's patience wore thin. The sun was high, the heat relentless, and the target still stood unscathed. The soldiers shifted uneasily, their pride wounded. Then a quiet voice broke the silence. "Let me try." All heads turned. Ilara Voss, the supply clerk, stepped forward. Her uniform was unadorned, her hands calloused from hauling crates, not handling rifles. "You?" General Hale frowned. "You're not a sniper." Ilara's gaze was steady. "I grew up hunting in the mountains of Kiros. The wind there is worse than this." A ripple of skepticism spread through the group. But the general, desperate for a solution, nodded curtly. "Prove it." As Ilara approached the line of rifles, the snipers exchanged glances, some amused, others annoyed. They'd spent years honing their craft. She'd spent hers organizing ammunition. Yet as she adjusted the scope, her movements were deliberate, her posture relaxed. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Ilara Voss was no stranger to silence. Growing up in the remote highlands of Kairos, she'd learned to listen to the wind long before she'd ever held a rifle. Her father, a shepherd, had taught her to track prey by the subtle shifts in the air, to read the land like a map written in whispers. When the military recruiters came to her village promising opportunity, she'd signed up not for glory but to escape the poverty that had claimed her mother. Assigned to logistics, she'd spent her days cataloging weapons, cleaning gear, and listening to the snipers' stories. She'd never been allowed to train with them. Her role was deemed too critical to risk in the field. But every night after her shift, she'd watch the marksmen practice, studying their stances, their breathing techniques, the way they adjusted for elevation and wind drift. She'd even salvaged scrap metal to fashion a makeshift rifle, practicing in secret on the outskirts of the base. The soldiers had laughed when she asked to join the range drills. "Stick to your crates, Clerk," one had sneered. But Ilara had kept her head down, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. Now, as she knelt behind the rifle, she felt the familiar weight of the stock against her shoulder, the cool metal of the trigger beneath her finger. The desert wind carried the scent of dry earth and distant storms, just like home. She closed her eyes, recalling her father's voice. "The mountain doesn't care about your rank. It only cares if you listen." When she opened them, the scope's crosshairs aligned with the target. The other soldiers watched, some smirking, others curious. "She'll miss," muttered a corporal. This isn't some folk tale, but Alara ignored them. She exhaled slowly, her breath sinking with the rhythm of the wind. The rifle's scope revealed the target as a tiny speck, barely visible even through the magnification. The math of the shot ran through her mind. 4,000 meters, a .50 caliber bullet traveling at 2,800 feet per second, wind speed 12 knots from the east, humidity at 30%. The calculations were second nature. Born from years of hunting in Kairos's unforgiving terrain, she adjusted the scope's elevation and windage, her movements so subtle they were almost imperceptible. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple, but she didn't flinch. The general, arms crossed, watched with a mix of skepticism and resignation. "This is a waste of time," he muttered under his breath. But as Alara's finger tightened on the trigger, the desert seemed to fall silent. The world narrowed to the scope, the wind, and the target. In that moment, she wasn't a supply clerk. She was the girl who'd hunted mountain goats at dawn, who'd learned to read the land before she'd learned to read words. And she was ready. The rifle's report echoed across the desert, sharp and final, cutting through the heavy air like a blade. For a split second, no one moved. Then the distant thud of impact reached them, a sound so faint it could have been mistaken for the wind. But it wasn't. The target, a small steel plate mounted on a wooden frame 4,000 meters away, wobbled slightly before clattering to the ground. A stunned silence followed, broken only by the rustle of the desert breeze. Then the snipers erupted into murmurs. "No way," whispered one. "That's impossible," said another. General Hale's eyes widened as he turned to the spotter, who confirmed the hit with a nod. Alara lowered the rifle, her hands steady, her expression unreadable. The general strode toward her, his earlier skepticism replaced by grudging respect. "How?" he demanded. Alara hesitated, then spoke softly. "I didn't aim for the target. I aimed for where the wind would carry the bullet." The soldiers exchanged glances, realizing the simplicity of her approach. While they'd focused on perfecting their equipment and technique, Alara had tapped into something more fundamental, the natural rhythm of the world itself. The general's voice when he spoke again was quieter, almost reverent. "You just did what 13 of my best marksmen couldn't." A murmur of awe rippled through the ranks. The snipers who'd once dismissed her now studied her with newfound respect. "Where did you learn that?" asked Captain Reyes. Alara smiled faintly. "The mountains taught me." The general extended his hand. "Welcome to the sniper team, Corporal Voss." But Alara shook her head. "I'm not a sniper, sir. I'm a supply clerk." The general chuckled. "Not anymore." The news spread like wildfire through the base, turning Alara into an instant legend. Soldiers who'd once ignored her now sought her advice, and the general ordered a full review of the unit's training protocols. Yet for all the attention, Alara remained unchanged, quiet, unassuming, and deeply connected to the land she'd once called home. Years later, when historians chronicled the event, they'd call it the Kairos shot, a moment that redefined what was possible. But for Alara, it was never about glory. It was about listening to the wind, to the land, and to the quiet voice within herself that had always known she was capable of more. The desert, indifferent to human triumphs, continued its eternal cycle of heat and silence. But the story of Alara Voss lived on, a reminder that skill is not always measured by rank or training, but by the courage to step forward when others hesitate. Her shot at 4,000 meters became more than a feat of marksmanship. It was a testament to the power of humility, observation, and the unyielding belief that even the simplest among us can achieve the extraordinary. In a world that often equates expertise with experience, Alara's legacy endures as a beacon for those who dare to trust their instincts and challenge the impossible. And though the target was long gone, its lesson remained. Sometimes the quietest voices hold the most profound truths.